The desert morning lay still, too still for a land that usually woke to the sharp cries of hawks and the distant lowing of cattle drifting across the plains. A lone cowboy named Caleb Boone rode slowly across the valley, a thin trail of dust rising behind his weary horse. He wasn't chasing anything in particular that morning, just riding fence lines, gathering strays, doing the quiet work that kept a man busy before the desert heat swallowed the land whole. Caleb lived by himself, miles out from the nearest settlement. Folks in town used to joke that he spoke more to the wind than to any living soul. And truth be told, they weren't wrong. The frontier does something to a man. It hollows him out little by little. Until silence don't feel empty anymore, it feels like company. But Caleb had chosen that life. Or maybe it had chosen him. The sun had barely crept over the horizon when his horse suddenly stiffened, ears pricked forward toward a patch of mesquite trees ahead. "What is it, girl?" Caleb murmured under his breath. Then he heard it, a faint sound drifting through the brush. Weak, broken, like a cry trying not to be heard. Caleb swung down from the saddle, one hand resting lightly on the grip of his revolver. He moved slow and careful, boots pressing into the sand without a sound. Then he stopped under the twisted shade of a mesquite tree. Curled into herself like something wounded and forgotten was a little girl. Her dress was torn nearly to rags. Dust clung to her face. Her hair, dark and tangled, had once been braided neat, but now hung loose like she'd been running for days. Her hands were scraped raw. A thin streak of dry blood marked her lip. Caleb's voice softened. "Hey now, Easy." The girl flinched hard at the sound, shrinking back against the tree like she expected a blow to follow. Caleb froze, then slowly raised both hands, palms open. "Ain't gonna hurt you," he said gently. "You got my word." Her eyes, wide, dark, and filled with fear, darted from him to his horse, then to the empty desert behind him like she was still expecting someone worse to come crashing through. Every breath she took shook her small frame. "You lost out here?" Caleb asked quietly. She didn't answer, but tears welled up in her eyes. That's when Caleb noticed it. A thin rope tied around her wrist, frayed, and snapped like she'd broken free in a struggle. His jaw tightened. "Lord have mercy," he muttered under his breath. Someone had tied this child. Someone cruel. "What happened to you, little one?" he asked softly. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came. Caleb leaned a little closer. "Go on, say it again." She swallowed hard. Then, barely louder than a breath, "Help, Mama?" Something in Caleb's chest twisted tight. "You got 'em out there?" he asked. The girl gave a weak nod. Caleb let out a slow breath and straightened. "Well then," he said gently, "first thing we do is get you someplace safe." He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Even under the rising sun, she was shivering like winter had hold of her bones. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. For a moment, she hesitated, then buried her face against his shoulder like she hadn't felt safe in a long, long time. Caleb climbed back into the saddle, holding her steady against him, and turned his horse toward his cabin out past the ridge. He didn't know who she was, didn't know where she came from, but one thing was certain. Somewhere out there, someone was searching for this girl like their whole world depended on it. Back at the cabin, Caleb wasted no time. He set water to warm over the stove and pulled out what little medical supplies he kept for emergencies. The girl sat on the edge of his narrow bed, small and tense, watching his every move like a frightened colt that hadn't yet decided if it could trust the hand feeding it. She didn't speak unless she had to, and even then, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Fear lingered in every movement she made, in the way her fingers curled, in the way her shoulders stayed tight, as if expecting pain at any moment. Caleb worked slowly, careful not to startle her, cleaning the cuts on her hands and face. After a while, her breathing eased just a little, and the sharp edge of panic in her eyes softened, though it never fully left. "What's your name?" Caleb asked quietly, keeping his tone steady and calm. The girl hesitated, her lips parting before she finally answered, "Lily." Caleb nodded gently. "That's a good name," he said. "Mine's Caleb." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether his words carried truth or danger. Caleb recognized that look. He'd seen it before, in wounded animals, in folks who'd survived things they shouldn't have. It was the look of someone who had learned the hard way that trust could get you hurt. When he handed her a bowl of warm stew, she didn't hesitate long before eating, but the way she ate told its own story. Quick, desperate bites, like she didn't know when the next meal might come. After a few moments, Caleb spoke again, softer this time. "You said your mama, where is she?" Lily's hands began to tremble, and her eyes dropped to the bowl. "Taken," she whispered. "Bad men." Caleb's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face hardening. He'd heard stories like that before. Outlaws raiding camps, men pretending to be lawmen, or worse, lawmen acting like outlaws. Out here, the line between right and wrong got blurred real easy. But pain always looked the same, no matter who caused it. "Do you know where they took her?" he asked. Lily gave a slow nod. "North Red Canyon." Caleb's mind went straight to a place he knew too well. Red Ridge Canyon, a stretch of land where the rocks rose high and the shadows ran deep, a place where trouble liked to hide. It wasn't the kind of place a man wandered into lightly, and it sure as hell wasn't a place for a woman alone. Caleb looked at the girl, really looked at her this time, and he didn't need to ask the next question, but he did anyway. "You want me to find her?" Lily's small hand shot out and clutched his sleeve. Her fingers trembling as she held on like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "Please," she whispered. Caleb swallowed hard. He'd been living a quiet life, keeping to himself, staying out of other folks' troubles. But quiet didn't mean cold, and it didn't mean blind. He knew that feeling sitting in her chest, the hollow ache of not knowing someone you loved was still alive. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I'll bring her back," he said. Lily's eyes filled with something fragile, something that looked a whole lot like hope. By noon, Caleb had his horse saddled and ready. He packed what he'd need: water, rope, his rifle, his revolver, and enough supplies for a couple days' ride. Before leaving, he knelt down in front of Lily, making sure she was looking him in the eye. "You stay inside," he told her firmly but gently. "Don't open that door for anyone but me. You understand?" She nodded quickly. Caleb reached into his belt and handed her a small knife, worn but sharp. "Keep this close," he said, "just in case." Lily held it tight, like it was more than just a blade, like it was safety itself. Caleb gave her one last look, tipped his hat slightly, and then swung up onto his horse. Without another word, he turned toward Red Ridge Canyon and rode out. The sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows as the day grew hotter. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, and the closer Caleb got to canyon, the more signs he found. Boot prints pressed into the dirt, wagon tracks cutting through the sand, and the distinct marks of shod horses. Not just one or two riders, a group, and recent. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of fire, Caleb reached the edge of the canyon. The red stone walls rose high on either side like silent giants, their shadows pooling in the narrow paths below. He dismounted and led his horse the rest of the way, knowing sound carried far in a place like that. One wrong move could give him away. As he rounded a bend, he heard voices. Men, laughing. The kind of laughter that didn't sit right. Sharp, cruel, careless. A flicker of firelight danced between two large rocks ahead. Caleb moved closer, keeping low, every step measured. And then he saw them. 3 men sat around a campfire, drinking and talking like they didn't have a care in the world. But Caleb's eyes moved past them and landed on what they'd been keeping behind. A woman, bound, bruised, exhausted. Her dark hair hung loose, her dress torn, her wrists raw where the rope had cut deep. Even sitting there, beaten and worn, there was strength in her posture, a quiet kind of strength that hadn't been broken yet. Lily's mother. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. The men weren't hiding her. They weren't in a hurry. They were waiting for something. Caleb didn't care what. He leaned back into the shadows and whispered under his breath, "Hold on, ma'am. I'm getting you out of here." Caleb moved back slowly, careful not to send a single loose stone tumbling down the canyon floor. His eyes stayed fixed on the 3 men below, studying them the way a hunter studies wolves, patient, calculating, waiting for the right moment. He circled along the canyon wall, climbing upward until he found a higher ridge that overlooked the camp. From there, he had a clear view. The firelight flickered against a red rock, casting long, shifting shadows, and the men's laughter echoed in a way that made the place feel even colder. Caleb lowered himself onto one knee and brought his rifle up, steadying it against the rock. He slowed his breathing, letting the world narrow until there was nothing but the sight in front of him. One deep breath, then another. He squeezed the trigger. The first shot cracked to the canyon like thunder, and one of the outlaws dropped before he even knew what hit him. The other two sprang to their feet, shouting curses, scrambling for cover as panic replaced their easy confidence. Caleb worked the rifle again and fired a second time, hitting another man square before he could reach his weapon. The third outlaw bolted for his horse. Fear taking over as survival became his only thought. Caleb didn't wait. He slid down the rocky slope fast, boots scraping against stone, moving like a storm breaking loose. By the time he hit the ground, the outlaw was already swinging into the saddle. Caleb lunged forward and grabbed him by the leg, yanking him hard from the horse. The man hit the ground with a heavy thud, and the two of them crashed into the dirt in a violent struggle. It was a dirty fight. No rules, no space for hesitation. Fists flew. Knees drove in hard. Elbows struck wherever they could land. The outlaw managed to get a grip on Caleb's throat, squeezing tight, cutting off his air as the world around him began to blur. Caleb's vision darkened at the edges, but he didn't stop. His hand found a loose rock in the dirt, and with the last of his strength, he brought it down hard against the man's head. Once, then again, the grip loosened. The outlaw slumped unconscious. Caleb rolled away, gasping for air, dragging in deep breaths until his lungs burned and the world steadied again. He didn't waste time. He pushed himself to his feet and hurried toward the woman. She watched him closely, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion, suspicion still burning strong. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice rough but steady. "Name's Caleb Boone," he replied, kneeling beside her as he reached for the ropes. "Your daughter sent me." At the word daughter, something in her broke loose. Her whole body trembled, and the strength in her eyes gave way to something raw and desperate. "Lily," she breathed. "She's alive," Caleb said firmly. "She's safe. Back at my place." Tears welled up and spilled down her face, a mix of relief and pain that had been held back too long. "Untie me," she whispered. Caleb nodded and carefully cut through the ropes binding her wrists. She winced as the tension released, but when she was free, she straightened up with quiet determination, refusing to let the pain take her down. "We need to go," she said urgently, glancing toward the canyon walls. "They'll have others. They always do." "Then we won't be here when they come," Caleb answered. He helped her to her feet and guided her toward his horse. She was weak, but there was no hesitation in her, only the will to keep moving. With effort, she climbed into the saddle, gripping the horn to steady herself. Caleb swung up behind her, taking the reins, and turned the horse back the way he came. As they rode, the canyon shadows stretched long behind them, and the silence between them carried more weight than words. After a while, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "You saved my daughter." Caleb shook his head slightly. "I just found her," he said. "She's the one who held on." The woman was quiet for a moment before she said, "My name's Sarah Whitaker." Caleb gave a small nod. "Well, Miss Whitaker, your girl's waiting on you." The ride back was slow and careful. Sarah's strength came and went in waves, and Caleb kept a close eye on the land around them, knowing men like those outlaws rarely rode alone. Each night, he stayed awake while she rested, his rifle within reach, listening to every sound the desert made. The crack of a twig, the shift of wind, the distant howl of something unseen. Out here, anything could mean trouble. One night, as the fire burned low, Sarah spoke quietly into the darkness. "I thought I'd lost her," she said. "I kept searching until they caught me." Caleb stared into flames, saying nothing at first. "She didn't give up on you," he finally said. Sarah's gaze stayed fixed on the fire. "She's strong," she whispered. Then, after a pause, she added, "You remind me of my husband." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "He died protecting us," she continued, "from men like them." Caleb swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said. Sarah shook her head gently. "You've got the same look," she said. "A man who's lost something, but still chooses to do right." Caleb didn't answer. He wasn't sure he believed that about himself anymore. But somewhere along the way, that girl, and now her mother, had stirred something in him he thought was long buried. Something that felt a whole lot like purpose. By the third morning, the cabin came into view, standing quiet against the open land. Caleb slowed the horse as they approached. Before he could even dismount, the cabin door burst open. Lily came running out, her voice breaking into the open air. "Mama!" Sarah slid down from the horse as fast as her strength would allow, dropping to her knees just as Lily threw herself into her arms. The two of them clung to each other, sobbing, their voices tangled together in relief and disbelief. Caleb stepped back, giving them space. He'd seen reunions before, but none that hit quite like this. Something tight rose in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like emptiness. After a long while, the cries softened into quiet sobs, and Sarah finally pulled back just enough to look at her daughter's face, as if needing to be certain she was truly there and not some cruel dream. Lily clung to her still, her small hands gripping tight, unwilling to let go even for a moment. Caleb stood a few steps away, hat low, giving them the space they deserved. There are moments a man doesn't belong inside, only near enough to witness. After some time, Sarah rose slowly, keeping one arm around Lily, and walked toward Caleb. Her eyes held something different now. No longer just pain or fear, but deep gratitude, the kind that doesn't need many words. She placed her hand gently over his chest, right where his heart beat steady beneath the dust and weariness. "You gave me back my world," she said quietly. Caleb shook his head, a little uncomfortable with the weight of that truth. "You don't owe me nothing," he replied. Sarah's expression softened, and for the first time, there was a hint of warmth in her voice. "Then maybe stay," she said. "Share a meal with us. Tell her how you found her. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." Caleb hesitated. Living alone had become second nature to him. Silence had been his routine, distance his comfort. But standing there, looking at Lily holding on to her mother like she'd never let go again, something shifted inside him. Lily tugged lightly at his sleeve, her voice small but hopeful. "Please stay, Caleb." He looked down at her, then at Sarah, both of them standing in the soft glow of the morning light. For a moment, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He felt invited, and that was something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, rare and genuine. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll stay." Inside the cabin, the air felt different that day, warmer, lighter. Lily spoke more than she had since he found her, telling her side of the story with bursts of energy, her fear slowly being replaced by something brighter. Sarah listened closely, her hand resting gently on Caleb's arm from time to time, as if grounding herself in the reality that both her daughter and the man who saved her were right there beside her. As evening settled over the land and the sky turned gold, then deep orange, Sarah stepped outside with Caleb. The desert stretched quiet around them, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly. Caleb looked out toward the horizon before answering. "Because no child should be calling for their mother and hear nothing back," he said. Sarah's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "You've lost someone too," she said. Caleb nodded once, slow. "My wife," he answered, "years back." Sarah reached out, her hand brushing against his in a quiet understanding that didn't need more words. "Then you know," she said. They stood side by side as the sky shifted from fire to dusk, the first stars beginning to show. Nearby, Lily sat on the ground, playing with small stones, humming softly to herself like the world had finally grown safe again. After a moment, Sarah spoke again, her voice calm but certain. "Our lives were broken apart," she said, "but you put them back together." Caleb didn't respond right away. He just listened. "You can leave tomorrow if that's what you want," she continued. "But if you decide to stay, this place, this home, is open to you." Caleb looked at her then. Really looked. A woman who had endured more than most could bear, yet still stood strong. A mother who had fought through fear and pain for her child. And then he glanced at Lily, a girl who had faced the worst and still held on to hope with both hands. Home. It was a word he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. But standing there, it didn't feel so distant anymore. "We'll see," Caleb said quietly. "One sunset at a time." Sarah smiled, not pushing further, understanding that some answers come slow. And as the night settled in around them, something inside Caleb began to ease. Something heavy that had been weighing him down for longer than he could remember. For the first time in years, the loneliness didn't feel quite so strong. And so, out on the edge of the frontier, where dust and danger shaped every life, a lone cowboy found more than just a lost child. He found a reason to stay, a reason to care, and maybe, just maybe, a place to belong again. And somewhere between that quiet cabin and the endless horizon, a new chapter began. Not just of survival, but of healing. If you're drawn to stories like this, raw, emotional, and carved straight out of the spirit of the Old West, stay close. There are more tales waiting just beyond the horizon.